in the mail.
This is production studio.
There's no disagreement about passing through. With we'll pay the gate fee. So the Torah portion, the name is Vayechi, which is describing the final years of Jacob. Jacob, Yaakov, we know, has been living in the land of Israel almost his entire life. And finally, the last 17 years of his life, he comes down to Egypt. And at this point, he is reunited with Joseph, who he thought to be dead for 22 years. He was living with the pain of thinking that his son had been killed. And now, finally, he's reunited with Joseph in the land of Egypt.
And the brothers are already there, right?
The brothers come down. Well, they visited several times, but they come down with him in this final journey where they're basically moving the whole family down to Egypt, a complete relocation. And the Torah actually describes the 70 souls, which really were almost the entire population of the Jewish people at that time, are relocated from the land of Israel to the land of Egypt. And Jacob is leading this move, this transition. But the Torah describes the life of Jacob with this word, Vayechi. Vayechi is a very powerful word. It comes from the word chai, which means alive. But it's the first time that Jacob's life is described with some level of vibrancy and vitality and excitement. And it's when he moves to Egypt and lives there for 17 years. And those 70 years are considered the best years of his entire life. And the commentaries discuss this because it seems a little bit anticlimactic. Joseph is in Egypt and Jacob is visiting him in Egypt. But this step to Egypt is going to be the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people. This is going to usher in a year of hundreds of years of exile, of hardship, of slavery. Until this point, he's been in the land of Israel. He's been under the beautiful influence of his parents, his grandparents, in the oasis of the Holy Land. And he's leaving all of that behind, going to Egypt, and we know Kabbalistically, Egypt, the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which in itself means narrowness, limitations, and constraints. And this is described as the best years of his life.
Now, wasn't he leaving for because of the famine also?
The initial impetus was the famine, yes.
Okay,
but they were bringing food back and forth.
Okay.
So he didn't necessarily have to live in Egypt in order for that to happen. The brothers had gone down several times to Egypt, and it was considered an established trade route to bring food from Egypt to the region, and he didn't have to move down to Egypt for that. But prophetically, he saw that this is what he was supposed to do. But the surprising part is that this is considered the best years, the most glorious years of his life, when it seems like it's actually starting to decline and starting to go into a very negative future of what the Jewish people were going to be facing. So the commentaries remind us that there was one critical thing that Jacob did before he decided and agreed to move down to Egypt, which was he sent his most powerful son, Judah, to go and establish a house of study and a house of prayer. And he said, if Judah can go and establish this house of study and prayer, then I can be there and I feel I can survive over there. And when he realized that this house of study and prayer would be able to sustain him even in the diaspora, he had a tremendous epiphany and realization that Judaism can have a future. Because when he was in the land of Israel, he always had this fear that Judaism would only survive as long as the Jews were tethered to their land and were embedded in this oasis of spirituality and holiness. But the minute they would be exiled, maybe their whole future would be in jeopardy. When he went down to Egypt and he was able to establish his house of prayer, this anchor of spirituality, of connection to higher values and deeper living, he realized that the power of the Jewish people supersedes the land that they live in. And not only was it sustainable for him, but he realized this would be the secret for all the Jewish children that would be born later on as well. That the Jewish people in general would be able to survive the exile because he saw the prototype, he saw the model had worked, that having a place of study and prayer, even in a place of diaspora, even in a place of exile, is powerful enough to sustain the Jewish people and to keep them connected as a people. Before he passes away, we're told that he has an encounter with his son Joseph, where he asks Joseph to come and meet with him before he passes and bring his two sons. Joseph has two sons. One is called Manasseh, and the other is called Ephraim.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Those are the guys who every Shabbos.
The origin of this Shabbos tradition of blessing our own family, they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh, originates in this week's Torah portion.
Because they're the first brothers that get along.
They're the first brothers to get along, and interestingly enough, where did they get along? In the diaspora.
Ah.
So what he's highlighting, it's very interesting because the Torah goes into...
Because they consider none of the other brothers to have gotten along. The tribes.
It's evident from Joseph and the brothers that they didn't get along. And that's clear. But what happens, this is the part of the message that Jacob is emphasizing to them. Because what happens is, when he gives them this blessing, it says that Joseph presented the two sons in front of Jacob in a way that Jacob would put his right hand on the older son and put his left hand on the younger son, which is considered the normal way of blessing, because the right hand is considered more powerful, more virtuous, and the one that gets the right hand is a greater blessing. So he puts the older one in that position to get the right hand on his head as the blessings are being bestowed upon him. But what Jacob does is he switches his hands and crosses his hands and puts his right hand on the younger one. And Joseph tries to correct him. He tries to put his father's hands back the other way. No, this one is the older one. And his father says, no, I know he's the older one, but the younger one is going to have greater opportunity and needs greater blessing because he's going to be a greater leader in his life.
Manasseh is.
The younger one is Ephraim.
Ephraim. Okay.
Ephraim is the younger one.
Oh, that's what we say.
That's why it's Ephraim v'Manasseh. So the commentaries point out that this is a very powerful and significant gesture that is loaded with meaning and inspiration and teaching of how we interact in life and how we understand certain aspects of surviving in exile. A couple of points. First of all, it's when Jacob wanted to bless the younger one with a greater blessing, he could have told the younger one, why don't you move over to my right side and get the blessing standing there. But he didn't do that. He facilitated the blessing. Meaning to say, sometimes things aren't the way we want them to be. It doesn't always mean that we need to get other people to move around. We need to sometimes absorb that flexibility to facilitate what needs to happen. So Jacob is really describing over here and modeling for us that sometimes we need to do certain things, but we don't necessarily have to inconvenience others or expect others who may not understand or be willing. In other words, he's protecting the dignity of Manasseh and saying, I'm not going to put you on the left side, but I'm going to still bless you as if it's on the left side. But another powerful thing that the commentaries tell us is that the reason why Jacob really chose to bless Ephraim, the younger one, is because Ephraim represents something that we all need to embody in an even greater way. Because the origin of these names is Joseph gave these names to his children based on his own experiences. The word Manasseh, which is the name of the older one, means to forget. And Joseph gave his son this name because he was grateful. He wanted to show gratitude to God for enabling him to forget the challenges and the hardships that he'd been through, from being sold by his brothers, to being in a pit, to being sold by Potiphar, to being in jail and enslaved. All these things that he had gone through, this trauma, which could have easily completely canceled his potential for success, he was able to disconnect or compartmentalize and forget those events so that they didn't infect him as he moved forward in life. So he called his oldest son Manasseh, saying, thank God that there's a positive aspect of forgetting and being able to move on and disconnect. But the second son was born, Ephraim, and he gave him a name which represents something even greater. Which the word Ephraim comes from the word to be fruitful, perut. And he was describing how, despite all his hardship and suffering, he was able to prosper and be successful in the face of all this challenge. So the two sons represent two modes of survival, if you will, in the diaspora, in a time of exile, in a time of hardship and even conflict. One is to be able to forget the hardship so you can just be. But then there's an even greater opportunity, a greater potential, which is not only to forget and survive, but to actually thrive in the face of this challenge. And what Jacob was doing was blessing his son, or his grandson, and by extension, all the Jewish people who were going to be following in exile, and saying, exile is not a place of surrender. Exile is not a place of failure. Exile is a place where we can not only survive, but we can thrive, just like Joseph did with his son Ephraim. And this blessing that Jacob was giving to Ephraim was really the blessing he was giving to all of us and to all of the future Jewish people that will be living in Egypt or at any time in a place of hardship and exile and difficulty. And this is why we're able to see towards the end of the Torah portion that the Jewish people, although they're entering into a 200 plus year state of exile, they're able to hold on to
Well, they did thrive right away, right? I mean, that was why Pharaoh wanted to enslave them, because they got too numerous.
Exactly. So this was the blessing of to be fruitful and to know that even though there will be headwinds and resistance and challenge and obstacles, that is only an opportunity to rise above that and to become even stronger. In other words, exile is only a concealed blessing. It's challenging because we don't see feel the goodness all the time, but it is at the same time it is a blessing because it gives us an opportunity to grow and to rise higher than we would have if we didn't have that challenge in front of us that we can rise above. And this is why we finish the Torah portion, which is the end of the whole book of Bereshit, with the words chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Let's be strong and be strengthened with our connection to Torah, even though it seems so anticlimactic. They exiled, the exile is intensifying, they're being persecuted, but the Jewish people know that our strength comes from a house of prayer, from a house of study, from a connection to Torah. It supersedes a physical place and is so deeply embedded in our heart and in our soul that wherever we go, we have the ability to overcome and rise above the obstacles and challenges we're facing. So the blessing that Jacob gives is the blessing and the validation that we all are given and shown that we can and therefore must overcome whatever obstacles, and even in a place of exile, we can create light, we can create Torah, and we can create something positive. So as we enter into 2023, it seems like there's a couple of headwinds ahead of us. It doesn't seem like there's what to be optimistic about, at least on some level, but Torah tells us there's always what to be optimistic. There's always a spiritual opportunity and a spiritual level of light that we can attain in every single situation. And that's what we are committed to, and that's what this year is going to be dedicated to. So, l'chaim, chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek.
That was amazing.
But Jacob is